this guy over to the side. Cool. All right. So today's world, cannabidiol, our new favorite cannabinoid. So Quicksilver has a nanoemulsion hemp oil with cannabidiol in it. These days, cannabidiol is sold as a food product, that being hemp oil. And then we obtain hemp oils with good degrees or good concentrations of cannabidiol in order to get the kind of therapeutic effects that we're looking for. So just as a disclaimer here to those of you who might misconstrue my intent here as that to heal, diagnose, or modify a disease state. That is not the case. We're just going to talk about the biochemistry of CBD and the kind of things that it's been used for and the kind of research that is going down around CBD. And I got to be honest, you know, I'm out here in Colorado, so obviously cannabinoids are a big thing, and we've done a lot of work around cannabinoids. And originally I was like, well, this is a good thing to get into from business standpoint, but really cannabinoids are for getting you high. But my God, was I wrong. The more I read about this, the more excited I become about this. I'm really kind of blown away when I see not only the clinical effects that people get, but really when I read through all this research and I see all of the different things that the cannabinoids can do. And the key to why I didn't really understand the therapeutic effect is that as a country, as we move toward, away from, I grew up on the East Coast, and any cannabinoids you ran into were, what we'd call ditchweed or swag out of Colombia or Mexico, and wasn't all that good. And then this revolution of breeding things that started in California and it moved out to Amsterdam and then made its way back into different parts of the U.S., arrived, and we had all these very strong varieties of cannabis, but they were strong from a THC point of view. And as many of you who've tried these high THC formulas know, that comes with very strong psychoactive properties, and sometimes they're not all that pleasant. It comes with a lot of paranoia, which comes from some of the glutamate excess and glutamate receptor type activity, which breeds a kind of anxiety, in this case of paranoia. But when CBD is balanced to the THC, the whole game changes. The effects, psychoactive effects, are strongly modulated so that they are not so intense. CBD takes away a lot of the paranoia, and it brings in a phenomenal that goes out to Jason Dyer, my friend, who likes to use the word phenomenal, a phenomenal amount of anti-inflammatory activity, immunoregulatory activity, and as we'll see, it's also going to bring in protective action towards reactive oxygen species and detoxification action, our favorite thing. So let's take a look at the cannabinoids. So what are the cannabinoids? So there's really a lot of cannabinoids, but we're going to focus on the two major ones. We're going to focus on THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. This is usually delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD, or cannabidiol. So THC is known for being strongly psychoactive, whereas CBD is not very psychoactive. It's not directly psychoactive, though it does modulate the neurochemistry that results in a relaxation effect. The THC is a strong agonist of the receptor sites that are in your body. These are called endocannabinoid receptors because you, yes you, make cannabinoids. And you make cannabinoids called endocannabinoids, and these are a big part of modulating your neurochemistry and modulating inflammation in the body and modulating your immune system. So THC is a strong agonist, or strong, it targets the CB1 and CB2 receptor, and I wrote there that it's focused on the CB1. In the absence of cannabidiol, THC dominantly hits the CB1 receptor. And it is a weak gene transcription modulator. Now, what do I mean gene transcription modulator? If you watch my talks, we talk a lot about things like NRF2 upregulation. NRF2 is one of these big gene transcription sets. It brings up all of our oxidative stress defenses and our detoxification or toxicity defenses. The results, and that's NRF2, and that's a nuclear transcription factor. There are other nuclear transcription factors that focus on mitochondrial health, like the SIR2 and the PPAR gamma, and also fat burning. There's a host of different ways to upregulate different genes to achieve different effects. Now, CBD, on the other hand, is non-psychoactive, though it modulates neurochemistry. It is a very weak agonist of CB1 and CB2. Unfortunately, I wrote CD, but that should be CB2. However, it strongly changes the effect of other agonists. So what that means, usually there's a receptor site, and there's agonists, things that work with hitting that receptor, and then there's antagonists that block the action of the agonists. So usually if you've got two agonists and one has stronger action on that receptor, it will affect that receptor, and the weaker agonist will not. In the case of CBD, it's very different. Even though it's a weak agonist, it has a very strong effect on other agonists such as THC and anandamide. In the case of THC, the CBD takes the influence of THC on the CB1 receptor and diminishes it and shifts it over to the CB2 receptor. That's why when you take THC and CBD combined, the psychoactive effect of the THC is much less, because it is shifting the effects of the THC from the CB1 receptor to the CB2 receptor. So this is just starting to be understood. In fact, they used to think that CBD was affecting acting on the CB2 receptor, but now they're seeing that it's sort of controlling which receptors different things go to. But what we're going to see as we get to the second half of this talk is that by far the strongest effect of CBD on the biochemistry and its healing effect is the way it affects gene transcription, the way it's upregulating or downregulating different gene sets. And we'll see that there are hundreds more genes that CBD affects than THC affects. Okay, computer. There you go. So, when the first thing to understand when you're getting comfortable with the idea of cannabinoids is that there is a endocannabinoid system. These are endogenous cannabinoids. They're related structures to THC and CBD, and they are made in your body to hit the receptor sites, CB1 and CB2, and have modulating effects on the body. So endogenous means made by the body, and these are part of a whole family of neuromodulating receptors. And as I said before, there's the CB1 and the CB2. Now, the CB1, as we're going to see in this next slide, are predominantly in the central nervous system. And as such, they have biggest effects on motor activity, thinking, motor coordination, appetite, sedation, pain perception, and short-term memory. Hence, THC is affecting the CB1 receptors and is a very heady or neurological type of thing. CB2 receptors are in the periphery. And in the periphery as such, they are affecting a lot of activity in the immune system, such as the beta lymphocytes and natural killer cells. And though they are distributed through the brain, their role in the brain is really not very well established. And often people will talk about disruption in the endocannabinoid system leading to disease states. One of the interesting things, so CB1 is also strongly influencing appetite and how you eat. Hence the whole idea that THC stimulates appetite. The idea of the munchies. Some of the first reasons that we use THC were involving appetite during chemotherapy. As chemotherapies are dysregulating your appetite, THC brings up appetite signaling and makes you hungry. So they found that the CB1 receptor is strongly effective in appetite. Interestingly, mice with a CB1 knockout, they took that receptor out, they would eat less and they would gain less weight. They were also a little bit more depressed. So there's incidentally, some of these slides that I have here in the beginning are from a friend of mine, Martha Montemayor. Thank you, Martha, for loaning me some of these slides. And she has noted down here that there was an obesity drug called Rimonabant that blocked CB1 receptors because it was trying to block that effect on creating appetite. And when it did block the CB1 receptors, yes, patients did lose weight, but they became severely depressed and expressed suicidal thoughts. Thus, they scrapped that whole drug there. CB2 is a much broader thing. CB2 seems to be attributed to everything in your whole body. We've got influence over the gut, influence over the kidneys, the pancreas, adipose and skeletal muscle, the eyes, influence over tumors. Well, that's in terms of influencing growth factors in tumors and helping with apoptotic switches. When we get into how CBD works on pain, we'll see that pain has a lot of runaway inflammatory processes associated with it. One of them is nuclear factor kappa beta. Nuclear factor kappa beta is a big target for cancer therapies. In fact, when you see lecturers like Bharat Agarwal, for example, talking about curcumin and boswellia, they'll be talking about how these things block NF kappa beta. NF kappa beta in tumors is constitutively expressed. That means it's expressed all the time. NF kappa beta is only supposed to be expressed occasionally when you need inflammatory reactions. When it becomes expressed chronically, one of the things it does is block apoptosis. So apoptosis is what kills developing cancer cells. And so tumors keep NF kappa beta, which blocks apoptosis, constantly expressed. This is one of the reasons that constant inflammation supports the growth of cancer and why we want to get control over NF kappa beta. And that's one of the great things that CBD does. Now, moving around our turn here, we've got the reproductive system, the immune system. In the immune system, we're mostly controlling aberrant inflammatory activity. Out of control inflammation is very dangerous. And if you've watched me talk about inflammatory reactions from lipopolysaccharides and how they are synergistically toxic with the metals. The metals and the inflammatory response on the lipopolysaccharide creates a synergistic amount of damage far beyond either one of those alone. And you see me talk about how that leads to damage to the proximal tubules of the kidneys and transport of toxins into the urinary flow. Now, God bless us all right now, because some of the research on CBD shows that it blocks lipopolysaccharide-induced inflammation. So we're going to start using it towards healing some of the damage to the kidneys, and we're going to use it especially for neurodetoxification, where lipopolysaccharides from leaky gut are causing not just peripheral damage, but they're causing neuroinflammation and the resultant brain fog and hyperanxiety that comes along with it. So we're going to see that CBD is super helpful in that. You see CBD affecting respiratory tract, skin. A lot of people use CBD in salves or balms to heal skin disorders. And then moving around, you see the central nervous system, the cardiovascular system, and affects neuroprotective effects, not neuroprotective, I'm sorry, hepatoprotective effects, protection on the liver. So, just a little bit about the endogenous cannabinoids. Anandamide is the first isolated endogenous cannabinoid. This was isolated by the iconic Professor Raphael Mechoulam at Hebrew University in Israel. And anandamide is the bliss molecule. Ananda is Sanskrit word for bliss. In fact, you see a lot of people in Hindu spiritual lineages, their first name or their last is Ananda. Satchitananda is being consciousness and bliss. And so Ananda makes its way into all of that terminology because we're trying to induce bliss. In spiritual literature, bliss is sort of a harmonizing influence between being and awareness, but that's for another lecture on another day. Anandamide is also found in chocolate, which is part of why chocolate makes you feel good and part of why women like it so much, because women do need a lot of bliss. Now, it is also produced by the body during meditation. My COO is wondering whether I should have said that. And it is thought to be responsible for runner's high feeling after exercise. See, it is the end of the year. It's the holiday season. And Christopher Shade is given a longer leash to speak. They're worried now. Okay, what other endogenous cannabinoids are there? Okay, so anandamide is predominantly associated with the neurological effects, and that's the feeling of bliss, and for tagging the CB1 receptor. Now, 2-AG, which is 2-arachidonyl glycerol, is the second most common endocannabinoid, and that's more associated with CB2. If you look at older literature, you'll see THC associated with CB1 and CBD associated with CB2. And we're seeing that's not exactly how it is. But with the 2-AG, that is more associated with CB2, and anandamide is more associated with CB1. 2-AG is found in animal milk, including breast milk, and it is sort of created on demand in neural synapses as one of the messaging signals. We have anandamide as a neurotransmitter, and 2-AG is more neuromodulating when it's in the brain, but when it's in the periphery, the 2-AG is more of an immune modulator. This is a nice picture of the synapses there and the formation of 2-AG and anandamide in the synapses and their effects on the different receptors. There you have anandamide kind of spreading itself out between a couple of receptors, but the direct shot is on CB1, and the 2-AG spreading itself also among the different receptors, but the most direct shot is on the CB2. There are a couple of other targets that are affected by cannabis, such as G-protein receptors, G-protein coupled receptors, ligand-gated ion channels, transient receptor potential vector channels. You'll see some of these things listed on that slide before, and on the ion channels. In fact, there is a good control over calcium, intracellular versus extracellular calcium by CBD. So, to review that a little bit, CBD is a weak agonist for CB1 and CB2. I know I said that they used to think that CBD was more of a CB2 receptor thing and THC was a CB1 thing. They're finding it's a weak receptor for either. Instead, it modulates how the other cannabinoids, the endocannabinoid anandamide and the exogenous cannabinoid THC, it modulates how they hit the receptors. And it will move them a little away from CB1 towards CB2. And this regulates both endogenous and ingested cannabinoids. You'll see a lot of the people selling CBD will talk about lubricating the endocannabinoid system. And that's through this modulation of how endogenous cannabinoids work across the different receptors. So there's what we'll talk about next are protective effects on the liver, brain, and modulatory effects on the immune system. And modulatory, it's mostly limiting runaway immune effects that are very strongly pro-inflammatory. The big biochemical effects from CBD, however, are through gene transcription modulation. All right, so there's our picture of the pretty cannabidiol molecule. And so let's look at some of the things from the literature that have been described for effects of or sort of protective actions of CBD. And then we'll look at the gene transcription research to get a good idea for how these things work. And then we'll talk about, well, if that's how they work, and we're used to using the Quicksilver products and other nutraceuticals to modify different pathways in detoxification, how can we incorporate cannabidiol into the therapies that we've already put together or therapies that we're developing? So, first one here, cannabidiol protects liver from binge alcohol-induced steatosis. What is steatosis? Steatosis is failure for the failure for the bile to flow. It's also called cholestasis. So we've got cannabidiol protecting the liver from this alcohol-induced steatosis by mechanisms including inhibition of oxidative stress and increase in autophagy, the most important of which is increase in inhibition of oxidative stress. Now, always when we're talking about steatosis, not to make this a shameless plug, but remember the Quicksilver black box. So when we were using the Quicksilver black box to relieve cholestasis and rebuild the liver, we were using dominantly, I'll see if I can get this bottle out here, phosphatidylcholine. Phosphatidylcholine because it protects, it stabilizes the membranes in the hepatocytes, which are going through a lot of oxidative damage, and that oxidative damage and the lack of phosphatidylcholine those cells are experiencing is creating that binding up the bile flow. We also put glutathione into that system for protection against oxidative stress. So we see that and incidentally, some of the earliest research on PC was towards its hepatoprotective effects during alcohol-induced injury. So they'd take monkeys, get them severely drunk, and ruin their livers, or they'd take monkeys, give them a whole bunch of PC, then get them severely drunk, and you don't want to be around severely drunk monkeys. They throw their poop already, and when they're drunk, I can only imagine what happens. They'll throw the bottle at you. But if you give them PC before you get them severely drunk, they didn't have so much damage to the liver. So there's a lot of the same things that are going on in here. There was protection of the membranes, and there's protection against oxidative stress. And you can find a lot of stuff in the liver. In fact, in the literature about protection against alcohol damage using various compounds that will either stabilize liver function, such as the PC, or upregulate protective function, like we're seeing from cannabidiol. Okay, sorry. Those were two papers actually looking at exactly the same thing. And I meant to pull up some of the graphs out of that paper, but did not put them in there. But those graphs, it was all protection against reactive oxygen species. So how do we get protection against reactive oxygen species in our world? And I don't have my usual people that I can point to and ask questions. But, Robert Slovak, my good friend Robert Slovak, he is here. Robert Slovak, if we want to protect, and you can't use hydrogen here, if we want to protect the cell against oxidative damage, what might we want to upregulate production of?
Glutathione.
Glutathione. Robert gets the prize. Here he's given a bottle of PC. We can then give him excessive amounts of alcohol, and he won't die from it. So, glutathione, our good friend. We can imagine that there might be one coming up about cannabidiol. Now, you'll turn down. You want to turn down your speaker over there. Good, very well done. Now we have neurological. So we have a peripheral effect of protection in the liver against liver damage. And now we're looking at neurological effects. So in neurological effects, here we have a paper, cannabidiol, a cannabis sativa constituent, as an antipsychotic drug. Very interesting. THC and hyperstimulation of the CB1 receptor has been shown to induce psychosis. CBD, on the other hand, has been shown to ameliorate psychosis. Here they're looking at ketamine-induced psychosis, but there's other papers on THC, where THC is inducing psychosis and CBD is reversing psychosis. So any of you who have experienced THC with different amounts of CBD will see that straight THC does make you changes the brain. Your perceptions are off. There's a lot of alteration there. Time-space continuum gets a little skewed. There's a lot of anxiety there. But when CBD is brought into it, those results, those negative results are brought more under control. There was some reports in the literature of an area in South Africa where they were smoking a certain plant that had tons of THC and zero CBD at all. And in that region where this plant was growing, they were reporting a lot of THC-based psychosis at the hospitals there. And in fact, one of the ways to bring down somebody who's had too much THC and have them have less of that paranoia is to administer CBD. In broader, more therapeutic sort of drug-like actions of CBD, we've got a couple of references from the literature. Here we have CBD as an anticonvulsant. In fact, I should have listed that early on as one of the most well-known effects of CBD, and that's the anticonvulsant effects or anti-epileptic effects. We see CBD used in multiple sclerosis. We see CBD used in bipolar. We see CBD used in schizophrenia. And there's a good example. THC can induce schizophrenic episodes, and cannabidiol seems to be able to block them. So let's move on. All right. What everybody's been waiting to hear. I was trying in a weak way to get everybody to think in their minds. Chris, when in the world are you going to mention that CBD might upregulate NRF2? Because we're all thinking that, aren't we? Any of the quicksilver heads out there are thinking, geez, plant compound like that protects your liver. It must upregulate NRF2. It doesn't. Forget it. No, it does. All right. So I spent hours and hours and hours reading this paper because it is the coolest paper I found on CBD. You can have papers that say, well, it does this or it does that, but you know how we are here. We like to know why it does this or that. And so, differential transcription profiles mediated by exposure to the cannabinoids cannabidiol and delta-9 tetrahydrocannabidiol in BV2 microglial cells. So, we're looking at gene transcription modulation. Now, when you hear me talk about genes, I talk about genes like a library. Like you've got this vast library of books that have all this information. Now, information is one thing, but action is another. And so nothing happens until you can read that information, digest it, and act on that information. So all those books are up there. But you're not going to act on all that information at once because it would just be sheer chaos. And you don't have enough resources to act on all that at once. You don't have enough energy and enough biochemistry to hold all these balls up in the air at once. So you will take different aspects of this library and activate or bring them into being at different times. That's gene transcription. You're going to take the DNA out. You're going to have an RNA read the DNA and read its code for the protein it creates, and then it's going to go to the ribosomes and make that protein. So what we find, we have this history of plant use in medicine that said this plant does that. We don't know why, but you take this plant and this happens. And now, in the days of genomics and what I call a lot of people call phytogenomics, that's plant chemicals regulating gene transcription, we're finding that these different plant compounds have their activity by the genes that they induce. So in the case of CBD, we're going to see major effects on oxidative stress, inflammation, and immunity genes. And we'll compare CBD to THC. CBD had a much broader effect than THC on a transcriptional level. And we saw, hallelujah to all of us in the detoxification world, that glutathione system is strongly affected, and the system is strongly upregulated through the agency of NRF2 ARE. What's ARE and EHRE? ARE is the antioxidant response element. It's also called the electrophile response element. And electrophiles, such as metals, are going in and pulling electrons off of things like thiols and damaging them. And so the electrophiles are stimulating the NRF2 translocation into the gene to turn on all of our good gene sets. But not only do we see a turning up of the detoxification genes, we see a turning down of the inflammatory genes. This is really key. Okay, so here in the numbers we see upregulated. Let me see if I can get a drawing tool here. Sorry, I had to switch computers. And life is a little bit different right now. No, I can't get my drawing tool. All right. It's that, guys. Is this broadcasting okay? Okay, cool. All right. So, in those circles you see up there, you see upregulated in green and downregulated in the green numbers and upregulated in the red numbers. If you look at then you'll see in each one you have a pair of circles where you have the number of genes affected by CBD, the number of genes affected by THC on the other side, and in the middle you have the number of genes that were affected by both. So then the top row is the number of genes that had a doubling or a one-fold increase. The bottom row, the middle row, the B, is number of genes that had a two-fold increase. And the lower one, C, is the number of genes that had a threefold increase. Or threefold change, threefold induction. So CBD downregulated 517 genes, whereas THC only downregulated 29. CBD upregulated 658 genes, whereas THC only did 36. And then as you go down, there's less and less genes that are more and more strongly influenced. So we see that CBD is really the major player on a phytogenomic level. It is bringing some things up and bringing other things down. What kind of things is it bringing up? Now, unfortunately, I can barely read this in this viewer here, but all right, that's all of our good friends that it's bringing up there. Those are glutathione synthesis genes and glutathione S-transferase genes. I mean, this is This is music to the ears of the detoxophiles here. And if you look over to the right, you'll see the induction levels. And some of these are most of them are 3 to 5 fold increase from CBD and a very minor increase from THC. What do we see downregulated? We see downregulated the inflammatory genes that are bringing on inflammatory cytokines and inflammatory receptors. And very interestingly, they've seen in other papers that the same group did that there was a strong modulation of inflammation in lipopolysaccharide treated cells. Remember, lipopolysaccharides, we'll see a couple of slides coming up that I've talked about many times about how lipopolysaccharides are modulating the damage from the toxins, basically spiking damage because of the inflammatory reactions that happen from the lipopolysaccharides. So here we see that the reported downregulation of the expression of CD2 mRNA by CBD, but not THC, in lipopolysaccharide treated cells is an agreement with blah, 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 a bunch of biochemical effects, but it's basically the STAT3 activation that is bringing a hyperinflammatory response and bringing a lot of the damage from lipopolysaccharides. So at the end, they say these effects of CBD on STAT3 and SOX3 could underlie the potential benefits of CBD in the treatment of neuroinflammatory diseases. Most of the people that we're dealing with that have strong toxicity, and especially the ones that have mold toxicity and Lyme disease, have very strong neuroinflammatory issues. Most of the autistic cases have very strong neuroinflammatory issues. In fact, I think the most exciting aspect of the CBD is for these neuroinflammatory cases. In fact, there was one doctor in Southern California that we gave some of our beta test CBD to, and he used these on his Lyme patients, and he reported, say it, Jason, phenomenal effects on Lyme, specifically for the neuroinflammatory aspect of Lyme disease. And I'm super, super excited for those cases, and especially for the autism market and the neuroinflammatory problems that go on in the autism market. Just to review a couple of slides that we've seen in the past, here we have the sort of quintessential slide showing a sort of spike in the toxic effect of xenobiotics when you go through those inflammatory spikes from lipopolysaccharides. And often when I'm talking about this, I'm keying into GI effects, specifically leaky gut, as a main contributor of lipopolysaccharides into circulation. And when those spikes of lipopolysaccharides come in, you get a spike in the effect of the toxins and a spike in the neuroinflammatory activity. And of course, I always do show this slide as well, looking at augmentation of mercury-induced nephrotoxicity by endotoxin in the mouse. And here we have endotoxin pulsing into circulation and causing a spike in the toxicity of mercury. If you look over to the left, you see that mercury creates some elevation of serum urea nitrogen, which is damage to the kidneys, where lipopolysaccharides create almost none. And then lipopolysaccharides and mercury together create a synergistic spike in the damage to the kidneys, resulting in what? Resulting in retention toxicity, damage to the transport proteins that are moving the mercury forms into the urinary flow, and thus lowering the mercury excretion and increasing mercury retention. And as you know, if we're looking at our testing methodology, here you see a person with elevated inorganic mercury in the urine and a unfavorable urine to blood ratio, showing that the proximal tubule transporters are not moving those mercury conjugates from the blood into the urinary flow, and then instead they're building up in the blood. So we know that inflammation coupled to metal toxicity are causing runaway inflammatory reactions that are damaging the probably causing kind of an interstitial nephritis that's stopping the transport of the toxins into the urinary flow. Now, if those inflammatory ultra damage reactions are happening in the kidney, they're probably also happening in the brain. So I'm very excited now to use cannabidiol along with kidney support to try to reverse this blockage of kidney excretion and get those urinary mercury levels up. Previously, we've used Rentone from AS Herbs. We've used Renalin from Soluna Labs. We've used MHP's kidney liquid and some Solidago, but now I'm very excited to bring in CBD into that activity. So this was also from that paper looking at different groupings of different genes. And some of these were on an immune level. Some of these were on a oxidative stress and toxicity defense level. So now we can go back and we can see why CBD was able to be hepatoprotective in the case of alcohol damage. Why? Because it upregulated NRF2 expression. And here we see at the top, there is NRF2 very strongly upregulated. And other genes that are also contributing to stress defense. And just for those of you who've forgotten, in this picture of a cell, you've got in the circle the nucleus, and outside of the circle, the KEAP1 NRF2 pair, where KEAP1 is holding on to NRF2 in the cytoplasm. Certain enzyme inducers tag that, change the conformation of the KEAP1, and if you're real savvy to thiol biochemistry, you'll see that those thiols turned into disulfide bridges, which means they were oxidized. So something creating oxidative stress, either reactive oxygen species, reactive nitrogen species, reactive sulfur species, or phytochemicals that create reactive oxygen stress. And interestingly, in some of the early biochemical work on CBD and THC, they saw that basically they'd take cells and they would overwhelm them with massive amounts of cannabinoids, more than you would ever take, I hope. And they created reactive oxygen species stress and depleted glutathione. The response of the body to that what should be a light stress, you don't wallop them like they did in those early biochemical experiments. The light oxidative stress creates a response where NRF2 is translocated into the nucleus, and the genes which have the promoter region of the antioxidant response element are induced, and these are antioxidants modulating enzymes, phase 2 detoxifying enzymes, and they will detoxify these electrophiles and free radicals, and not just the ones that came in and induced them, but a lot of the other ones that are sitting in the cell. So we are turning up expression of intracellular antioxidants, phase 2 detoxifying enzymes, and now we're finding we're also turning up expression of the phase 3 transport proteins with these different phytochemicals. A lot of this research is done in the cancer journals. Here we have mutation research cited. And of course, everybody knows that CBD has great promise as an anti-cancer element. And so these are some of the pathways by which this happens. Some of the other pathways we're not really going to discuss today, but they involve enhancing apoptosis. Now, I don't have slides on it, but I did mention, well, here we talk about it a little bit in this next one, downregulation of NF-kappa beta. There are a lot of inflammatory disorders, which, as I mentioned before, have chronically upregulated NF-kappa beta. CBD is able to downregulate NF-kappa beta. And if you recall what I said before, NF-kappa beta is blocking apoptotic cascade. Apoptosis is controlled cell death that is invoked when you recognize that there is genetic damage. You have plenty of different, and frankly, they're probably upregulated by CBD, but you have plenty of proteins that you make which are responsible for scanning the genome and looking for damage. When they see mutations, they invoke an apoptotic cascade to kill the cell rather than have that rebellion from within the genes. If NF-kappa beta is chronically active, it is going to block the apoptotic signaling and block that cell death and allow proliferation of those cancer cells. So, summarizing neuroinflammatory process effects on CBD, we are controlling body-wide, we're controlling inflammation, we're controlling NF-kappa beta, we're down-regulating that whole gene set that was shown before, which are invoking both production of pro-inflammatory cytokines and the receptors for those cytokines. So we're blocking inflammation in these different ways. We're turning up our anti-inflammatory cascade, as we've often referred to it, through NRF2 upregulation. But in the brain, we're also stabilizing NMDA receptors. Now, I forgot to put in my glutamate slide. If you recall seeing me show slides about glutamate in the brain, neurons over time, unfortunately, age is a contributing factor to death, Peter. He's shuddering over there. Age is a contributing factor to things sucking. That happens, and I've showed you slides before of neurons losing their antioxidant, the robustness of their antioxidant system over time. But when glutamate is in excess, they lose that integrity at a much more rapid rate. NMDA receptor is the glutamate receptor, which is invoked and gets destabilized and overactive under different pathological states. Now, a lot of people with in any neuroinflammatory situation, you have overactivation of the NMDA receptors. There can either be excess production of glutamate or just excess activity of the NMDA or glutamate receptors. And this is creating anxiety situations. It's creating a free radical cascade from nitric oxide being turned into peroxynitrate. That free radical cascade, along with the excess glutamate activity, is creating not only anxiety, but brain fog as part of this inflammatory process. This is the great promise of CBD for neuroinflammatory processes because it stabilizes the NMDA receptors so they're not hyperactive. It upregulates NRF2 processes, which control the formation of peroxynitrite from nitric oxide so that we quench that free radical as it's made, and lower, because of lowering glutamate activity, lower that anxiety that comes along with that. Anybody who's heard me talk knows that one of the dominant neurological expressions of mercury toxicity is anxiety through hyperstimulation of the NMDA receptor. So now we have a single agent that turns up free radical control, detoxification, and glutamate signaling control in the brain. And this will become one of our greatest weapons for neurological detoxification. I'll work on putting together protocols for this, but basically the best things to combine with CBD for neurological detox are phosphatidylcholine, activated methylating B complex, like our methyl B complex, and free radical quenchers like glutathione, and GABA for helping to counteract the activity of the glutamate receptors. One way to go would be to get the black box liver detox. I've said numerous times that the liver detox is also a neurological detox, and the only thing really missing is the CBD. In our sampler boxes, I'll be talking a little bit about our energy sampler box, but we also have our neuro sampler box, which has glutathione, PC, B complex, and GABA in it, I believe. Maybe it has something else in there. He's going to confirm for us. But phosphatidylcholine, why? Stabilize membranes. B complex, to feed methylation, jumpstart methylation in the brain, and feed brain a lot of the brain reactions that are going on there. Glutathione as to help with the free radical quenching, and of course we know why GABA. Neuro. Sure.
CoQ10, B12, glutathione, GABA.
Well, we're missing the PC in the neuro box, but it would also be a good one to blend with the CBD for a neurological detoxification. So now we get on to talking about delivery of our CBD. If you're familiar with CBD and other cannabinoids like THC, you know that there's a very low absorption in the GI tract, roughly 10% absorption. So the things that are best for doing any of our nanoparticle type deliveries are things that have low absorption and high price, like CBD. As we all know, if we've taken CBD, there's a premium on that. So this was an obvious target for Quicksilver to get involved with because of our advanced delivery system. So, of course, we're going to use phospholipid encapsulation. Phospholipids, as you know, are combined of a hydrophobic tail end and a hydrophilic polar head, and they arrange in these bilayer sheets where they tuck their fat-soluble ends into the core and their water-soluble ends out towards the water. Now, these can arrange differently depending on what you're trying to deliver. We can have liposomes, which you see on the left, where you have a phosphatidylcholine or phospholipid bilayer forming a sphere with a water core. So if we want to deliver glutathione, vitamin C, lipoic acid, methyl B12, we make a liposome, or more accurately, a liposome. On the right, you see three things in a row. There you see a liposome with your phospholipid bilayer and water core. And I like that picture because it's right next to a nanoemulsion where the phospholipids have ordered themselves around a liquid lipid droplet, an oil droplet. The fatty acid tails of the phospholipid are pointing into the lipid, and the water-soluble heads are on the outside of that droplet, and that's stabilizing the size of that oil droplet in that water matrix by hiding the interface of the oil from the water. The one all the way to the right they call a lipid nanoparticle. Really, that should be called a solid lipid nanoparticle. Their idea was that that's a solid lipid there. And in the middle, it's a liquid lipid. Now, lipid nanoparticles can be liquid lipids or solid lipids. Then they'd be called solid lipid nanoparticles. So for our discussion here, we'll continue to call this a nanoemulsion. If you've seen me talk before, you'll see that there is a lot of movement of these lipid nanoparticles, sometimes liposomes. Here we have recent advances of liposomes as pharmaceutical carriers, trends in liposomes used as novel drug delivery systems. And then you'll see lipid nanoparticle formulations for oral drug delivery, advances in oral transmucosal drug delivery, solid lipid nanoparticles as oral bioavailability enhancers. So what do you need to be able to go right through the oral cavity? You need small size. And yes, size matters, and we want it small as can be. And as I've talked about when I talk about liposomes, when we make liposomes, we're trying to make liposomes in sort of a 50 to 100 nanometer range, where we can get them as small as possible for fast absorption in through the oral cavity, but we don't want them too small. A liposome can go down to 20 nanometers, but when it goes that far, it doesn't have a lot of internal volume. So we like to stay in the 50 to 100 nanometer range. But when we go to nanoemulsions, we can go even smaller. Smaller the better. So before I show you a picture of the size of the nanoemulsions of CBD that we make, we'll just show a couple other pictures around nanoemulsions. Unfortunately, I don't have my little pointer, access to my pointer here. But on the top left of the screen, you see this schematic where you've got an oil core surrounded by a mixture of a surfactant and a co-surfactant. The surfactant is the primary emulsifier that is modulating the interface between the oil and water, lowering the thermodynamic potential there so that the oil can exist in these small drops in the water. Normally, when you disperse oil droplets in water, what do? They coalesce because there's a lot of energy consumption to keep that interface between the oil and water. So they minimize that by creating large droplets. So if we want to stabilize very small droplets, we need surfactants on the outside. So our surfactant is our phosphatidylcholine, and our co-surfactant is the TPGS, the vitamin E analog, tocopherol polyethylene glycol succinate 1000. That's a water-soluble vitamin E that was used for cholestatic children to get vitamin E to them, and that is helping us to stabilize our membrane. On the right, you have a more sophisticated diagram of a nanoemulsion where they have phospholipids and a polyethylene glycol forming the membrane, stabilizing a droplet of soybean oil, which has nanocrystals in it. So now if you substitute the soybean oil for various terpene oils and those holding our cannabinoids in them, you will have our nanoemulsion particles of CBD. And in the future, as we move into the medical cannabis area more, you'll see in certain states CBD THC mixtures like that. So, because I like to show size, here's a picture of our CBD nanoemulsion with a mean diameter of, drum roll please. Does somebody make drum sounds here? Well done. 21.7 nanometers. How's that for size? That's pretty darn small. And hence the quick uptake. And I'll tell you the story. I can't show you pharmacokinetic data right now because we were just getting it this week. It was a very exciting time. And in Colorado here, we were working on a project with another company on pharmacodynamics of cannabinoids delivered in this same size nanoparticle. And we did two different ways. One was the intraoral delivery that we commonly do. And the other way was by taking the surfactants and the cannabinoids into a capsule and swallowing it with a glass of water, which is called a self-emulsifying drug delivery system. You theoretically make all these little you make these emulsified particles in your GI tract. The difference is when we make them in the laboratory, we make a 20 nanometer particle, and if you make them in your belly, you make a 400 nanometer particle. That 20-fold size difference really affects the kinetics and the absolute absorbability of these compounds. So what was reported by our clinical study participants is that the intraoral delivery they could feel within 5 to 10 minutes, and within 20 minutes it was strongly active, with some growth after that, because you're getting about half of those nanoparticles in the oral cavity and the other half as they're going down. So you and we'll look at some later some slides on pharmacokinetics of B12, where after about 30 minutes, you have about 60% of your payload in, and then the rest is coming in through the GI tract over the next 20, 30 minutes. And this is what they reported. Onset, 5 to 10 minutes. Strong activity, 20. Most of it in by 40 minutes. And a little bit of creep up towards 60 minutes. Then maintenance of that neurological feeling over the next 3 to 4 to 5, sometimes 6 hours, and then coming down. So when they did the oral capsules, none of the effects came on till after 60 minutes. So we see very obvious pharmacokinetic effect of the size of these particles and the intraoral delivery of those particles. Some of the data around cell uptake versus size, this was really stunning data. These were CATCO2 cells, and they made very tightly controlled sizes of liposomes, and they incubated them with cells for either 15 or 60 minutes. And you'll see between 236 nanometers and 97 nanometers, there was a 9-fold increase in absorption into the cell. When that particle size went down to 64 nanometers, there was a 34-fold increase over the 236 nanometer liposomes. And when it went down to 50 nanometers, that went up to a 40-fold increase in absorption. That's radical. I mean, that is a radical size effect. So smaller is better. And as I just showed you, let's go back again just to see how beautiful it is. 21.7 nanometers mean size. Like the size? There's drum rolls happening. We are excited. We know this stuff works beyond a shadow. My God, there's people woohooing in the background. Woohoo! With the B12, we can look at the pharmacokinetic data over on the left. Unfortunately, I switched colors in the middle of this one, so I shouldn't have done that. Over on the left, you see the intraoral B12, where it shoots up very, very quickly in 20 minutes. You got about 60% of your peak plasma level of B12. You got a 3-fold higher peak plasma level of the nanoliposomal B12 versus something called a sublingual B12 that was just water, ethanol, and glycerin. And you see with the water, ethanol, and glycerin, it wasn't until 60 minutes that it started really entering the blood, and the big peak was at 2 hours. Over on the right, this is a combination of a number of data. The blue curve is liposomal, and the orange curve is non-liposomal. And you see that very rapid entry into the blood from the intraoral delivery. 4 minutes after the dosing, we've already had, I think it was about a 20% increase in the blood levels of B12 versus that effect, that 20% increase took about 60 minutes with the non-liposomal formulas. And with the methyl B12, that was a 45 nanometer liposome. So size matters, smaller the better, 20 nanometers. The other thing that size is important for is clearance. When particles like this do get into the blood, the larger they are, the faster they're cleared from the blood. And anything as you go over 100 nanometers, you start to get rapid clearance from the blood. And as you get down under 100 nanometers, you get long circulation, and you also get better penetration of the blood-brain barrier. So, just to give you an idea of time, all right, we'll talk about time, and we'll talk about total amount into the system. So in time, you've got inhaled forms of cannabinoids with an onset of 1 to 3 minutes, duration of 1 to 3 hours. Tinctures, onset of 30 to 60 minutes, duration of probably 1 to 4 hours. Edibles, I took 30 to 60 minutes from somebody else, but most people who take edibles know that it's really like 60 to 120 minutes, with more coming after 360 minutes and 200. It just keeps going up, 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 lasts for 8 to 12 hours. Topicals, 30 to 60 minute onset, 2 to 3 hour activity. Intraoral nanoemulsion, 5 to 15 minute onset, 2 to 4 hour duration. This is the perfect bridge between the edibles and the smokables. But it's not just a kinetics difference. It's an absolute absorbance difference. As we get our data, I'll get final numbers for you. I've always predicted it would be a 3 to 5, even 6-fold increase in bioavailability using the nanoemulsion versus typical oral. Everybody who's used the different cannabinoids in this form has reported basically those numbers, that 20 milligrams this way will be roughly equal to 75 to 100 milligrams in a typical edible. So you're going to have not only a better time frame, fast onset, a more manageable duration, but you're also going to have higher bioavailability. And I will guarantee you it'll be 3 to 5-fold higher bioavailability. So you may pay more initially per milligram of CBD to get our nanoemulsion, pictured here, but you are going to be saving yourselves money. I mean, typical doses for anxiety are 3 to 12 milligrams max. For pain, you might be going up to 24 milligrams of CBD in these formats, and you'll be getting very strong effects, where typically you'd be using, again, 3 to 5-fold more of that in a normal ingestible CBD. Here's our fine bottle of CBD. There's 300 milligrams per bottle. All these bottles have 100 pumps in them. The pump is 0.5 ml. The pump has then 3 milligrams of CBD. Terpene profile in this is dominantly that of limonene with a little bit of myrcene in it. We do have a holiday special here. The CBD is doctor only wholesale right now, and it is 10% off through January 3rd. But we want other holiday specials, and we want you to have a very fun Christmas. And there is a lot of things to do. There is a lot of parties to go to. There is a lot of dinners to go to. And so we put the energy box on special. The boxes are sampler boxes, so you don't have to go in and buy a full case of these for the wholesale market. You can get themed 4 different products themed out here. Here for energy, we are doing pure PC. PC will also act as a hepato and neuroprotective during the the holiday season. Vitamin C is also another protectant as well as an energizer. Vitamin C really does help keep your energy stable. Of course, the most dramatic energizers, and these are the ones that I have everybody try when we go to conferences, are methyl B12 and CoQ10. Both of these are mitochondrial stimulants and neurological stimulants, and they will bring your energy up guaranteed. When you're getting the end of that dinner and you still want to go out to the after dinner parties, you hit the CoQ and the B12, and I guarantee you will get there. The PC will guarantee that you return from those after dinner parties. So that is 10% off through January 3rd. When we go into January, we will more than likely put the detox boxes on special so that you can clean yourself up after all of that holiday festivity. So sorry I didn't put a little picture of a Christmas tree on there and a Santa Claus, which would be a little bit Christian oriented. We're going to put that beautiful picture of the Colorado sky and that mountain that is right behind the Quicksilver building, isn't it, Philip? Uh, on our holiday cheer there. And so with that, I think I have all of the product promotions covered, and we can move on to Q&A. And so Thomas is going to read the Q&A from the other room. So Thomas, I'll be waiting to hear you coming in with the Q&A.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So they can hear us too. So let's start with the first question. This one is from Greg. Can Chris address PEG, form of vitamin E used in some products? I've seen that it may be processed using dioxin, and EWG even say it's not recommended.
EWG
aspect, not vitamin E.
Say that last part.
So he wanted to know the PG aspect, not the vitamin E aspect.
Yeah. Okay. So TPGS is a vitamin E that's conjugated to a kind of shortish chain polyethylene glycol, and that does tend to freak some people out. And
I think
environmental working group he mentioned does not recommend PEGs. I don't know if that was specifically the TPGS they were talking about. The TPGS has reams of safety data. They had children taking 6 grams of this a day with no adverse effects. Now, I'm not going to recommend you take 6 grams of this. In its uses in some of these products, it's for stabilizing the membrane with these complex mixtures of phytochemicals, and it is essential for stabilizing a small size. It is only there in your dosages in milligram quantities, anywhere from 6 milligrams at the small doses to, well, let's see, if you're taking a 12, anywhere from a low of 2 milligrams to a high of maybe 20 milligrams if you're taking really high doses of things. And so here you have safety studies that were done with 6,000 milligrams per day and having no problem. So I've made a determination, as I do with all of these things, that the benefit far outweighs the risk in this case. And just so you guys know a little bit about me, I didn't come from the better living through chemistry background of the 60s and 70s. I was an organic farmer, not just organic, I was a biodynamic farmer before I became a chemist. I have exquisite sensitivity to what compounds might be good or bad for us. So if there's anything I put into my systems, I have determined that myself intellectually, as well as energetically, that these things are a net positive that enable us to get a therapeutic effect that vastly outweighs any of the negativities that might happen if we were to eat whole bowls of these different compounds. So that's the TPGS. And in fact, all of our like super sensitive muscle tester types that test all these formulas, all of them test good. I've even given them raw TPGS to test, and they're fine with that too. And so that's where we ended up with this. It really is a great compound for allowing us to do the very complex chemistry that we do. You have another question for me, Thomas?
Yes. There's a lot of questions about. Okay, this is a good one that summarizes them. To get the most effective benefit from CBD, don't you need some THC along with it?
Great question. Okay. Some of the effects of CBD are better when there's THC there, like anti-epileptic effects or anticonvulsant effects, effects that are neurological in terms of the neurochemistry more than the biochemistry, do benefit from a little THC. Now, all natural CBD has a little THC in it, which makes the hemp oils probably better than the synthetic CBDs. Most of the ratios of the hemp oils are about 40 or 50 to 1 CBD to THC. The legal requirements for industrial hemp are that the plant is below 0.3% THC. The hemp oil that we use is from Colorado, where it is regulated by the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and every field is tested by the Colorado Department of Agriculture for THC content before it can be harvested. In fact, I know some people that lost a $250,000 field of hemp because they had I think it was a 0.4% THC. So, all of these come from legal regulated hemp oil, but there is still some THC. When you measure these raw oils, they run, as I said, 40 or 50 CBD to 1 THC, and this may be why they have such a good neurological effect. However, THC is not required for expression of NRF2 and some of the gene modulating reactions that we looked at there. When we get into the cannabinoid chemistry, medical cannabis, you see most of the best products do have a good amount of THC. Sometimes you have 4 CBD to 1 THC. Some of them are 1 CBD to 1 THC. Some of them are 4 THC to 1 CBD, depending upon the therapeutic action that you're going for. But in any case, here we have a beautiful CBD to bring into it that will not have that strong psychoactivity of the THC. Another question?
What have you seen in research are chronic leukemia/lymphoma and cannabinoids? Thank you.
I was just reading peripherally some of the papers on that, but I haven't digested them enough to talk about it right now, except that a lot of the regulatory gene transcription regulation was around immune cells, and a lot of the cells that have a lot of the CB2 receptors are immune cells. So I think we're going to find very strong application of cannabinoids into leukemia. I just don't know enough about the outcomes. Next question.
Would CBD be effective in treating peripheral neuropathic pain due to controlling neuroinflammatory processes?
Great question. Peripheral neuropathy controlled by CBD. I'm going to say yes. We have started, as we beta tested the CBD, we've used it on some really extreme pain cases. One was a suicidal post-operative pain that 4 pumps of CBD completely controlled, where none of the narcotics controlled it. Why is CBD so good on pain? Because its ability to turn down inflammation, to actually affect directly pain receptors, and to lower part of the neuropathic pain is neuroinflammatory, as this person astutely mentioned. GABA is necessary for shutting off pain receptors. Pain receptors get stuck open when you've got excess glutamate and deficient GABA systems. And by controlling the NMDA glutamate system, you're allowing flexibility into the GABA system that I believe is a big part of it being able to stop these chronic pains. So neuropathic pain, which is peripheral neuropathic pain, I think will be very well influenced or controlled by CBD. Other things that go into controlling neuropathic pain are B vitamins, specifically B12 and B6 that you would find in our methyl B complex. And so I would do those along with maybe glutathione and PC and a lot of CBD. And I'm very interested to hear what kind of results people get. In fact, there's one of our doctors who has a stubborn peripheral neuropathy. Call me. I want to use it on you. Next question.
This is going to be the last question, and I'm going to copy all the questions so I can respond to everybody later. And so, why is CBD excitatory rather than anxiolytic in some individuals?
Oh, good question. So he said, why is THC excitatory?
Why is CBD excitatory rather than?
And the question said versus anxiolytic. So anxiolytic means lytic is break, cleave, breaking anxiety. And this is one of the most well-documented aspects of CBD is breaking anxiety. There's a lot of, in neurochemistry, there's always a lot of what are called paradoxical reactions. And paradoxical reactions are where you take something that should be a downer, but it's an upper on you. You take something that's supposed to be an upper, but it becomes a downer on you. So I could, just blanketly say there's got to be paradoxical reactions, but why are there paradoxical reactions? I've seen some reference. And, unfortunately, we're very early on to the literature, and there is not great consensus. So one paper will say it does X, and one paper will say it goes left, one paper will say it goes right. But one paper was claiming that it speeds up the breakdown of GABA and promotes dopamine, thus why it's able to bring concentration. I know I run this company, and everybody at the company is always asking me questions, and sometimes that makes me very ADD, and I can't get any focus to get anything done, and I find that GABA gives me the stability to get that done, and I thought about it as lowering the glutamate type anxiety, but I've seen reference to it stabilizing dopamine, which allows you focus. And it says it does that at the expense of breaking down GABA. Now, before I read that, I used to talk about CBD as lubricating the GABA system because I wanted to say it made GABA, but I didn't know it made GABA. And now here's some references to it breaking down GABA. So in certain individuals, what it does to the GABA is not balanced by what it does to the glutamate system. And there's probably this net result of some anxiety with them. So perhaps with them, they need to supplement GABA before they supplement CBD. So that was the last question. I'll leave you with that. Remember, we have CBD wholesale on sale, 10% off until January 3rd. We have the energy sampler box, and it is a beautiful box. In fact, you can put it on display. You're going to want to put this underneath the Christmas tree at your office, and everybody's going to go in and start pilfering out the goods. But if you love your staff, you doctors, set them up with this for the holiday season, and then set one up for yourself and hide it in your office or at your house. So thank you very much. It's always great talking to you. Sorry about the problems with GoToWebinar in the beginning. Disoriented me a little bit, but we got done. And happy holidays to everybody. May they be chill.